You know what? Go see your precious museum. We'll just continue without you. My son's words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath as we stood in Obidos's picturesque main square. The medieval Portuguese town with its whitewashed buildings and cobblestone streets suddenly felt alien and threatening rather than charming. "Nathan, you can't be serious," I stammered, searching my son's face for any hint that this was a poorly conceived joke. "We're in a foreign country. I don't speak Portuguese. I don't even know the name of our next hotel. Mom, you've been complaining this entire trip," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Nothing we do is good enough. The hotels are too modern. The schedule is too rushed. We're not seeing the real Portugal. I just suggested we might visit this small museum I read about." I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "It wouldn't take more than an hour. An hour. We don't have a lease," my daughter-in-law interjected. She stood beside our rental car designer sunglasses perched on her perfect nose, scrolling through her phone with deliberate disinterest. "We have reservations at that coastal restaurant I told you about, the one with 10,000 Instagram tags. If we don't leave now, we'll miss our slot. God forbid we miss a photo opportunity," I muttered immediately, regretting the comment when I saw Nathan's expression harden. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Mom." The constant passive-aggressive remarks. "Elise has spent weeks planning this itinerary, and you've done nothing but criticize." The unfairness of his statement stung like a slap. I had been nothing but grateful for the invitation to join them in Europe, a dream I'd put off for decades while raising Nathan alone after his father left, while working 2 jobs to put him through college, while supporting his early career with babysitting his children whenever called upon. Even after David, my second husband, passed away 3 years ago, I'd focused on being helpful, unobtrusive, appreciative. But something in me, something new and unfamiliar, refused to accept this characterization. "That's not true, and you know it," I said, standing straighter. Despite the weight of my 67 years, I've been accommodating every step of this trip. I've gone along with Alyssa's schedule without complaint, even when it meant rushing through places I've waited my entire life to see, just so she could get the perfect lighting for her social media posts. Nathan's jaw tightened the same expression he'd had as a stubborn teenager. "Whatever, Mom. We're leaving. You want to see your precious, authentic Portugal? Here's your chance." He turned and walked toward the car. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Surely he wouldn't actually leave me here, Nathan. My voice wavered. "This isn't funny." He slid into the driver's seat without responding. Elise lingered a moment longer, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Don't worry, Judith," she said with artificial sweetness. "I'm sure you can find your way to Lisbon. Maybe ask one of the locals." She gestured vaguely toward an elderly Portuguese woman selling handcrafted lace at a nearby stall. "Oh, wait. You don't speak the language, do you? Well, I'm sure you'll figure something out." She got into the passenger seat, and I watched in disbelief as they closed the doors. The engine started. Surely this was just a scare tactic. They wouldn't actually drive away. Through the open window, I heard Elisa's voice not bothering to lower her volume. "Vamos ver a volta. Let's see how she gets back." Nathan's laugh joined hers as the car pulled away from the curb. I stood in stunned silence as they drove down the narrow street and disappeared around a corner. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. My own son couldn't have just abandoned me in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, didn't know anyone, had no idea how to get to our next destination. But he had. Panic surged through me, a wave of dizzying fear that made my knees buckle. I grabbed the edge of a nearby stone bench to steady myself, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Oh, God," I whispered to myself. "Oh, God, oh, God." A quick inventory of my situation only heightened my terror. I had my purse with my passport credit card and about $200 in cash. I had my phone, but I'd been relying on Nathan's international data plan the entire trip. Without Wi-Fi, my phone was useless for maps translation or finding accommodations. I didn't even have my suitcase. It was in the trunk of the rental car along with most of my clothing, medications, and toiletries. I sank onto the bench, trying to control my breathing as black spots danced at the edges of my vision. "Don't pass out," I told myself sternly. Don't make things worse. A group of tourists passed by, laughing and taking photos, oblivious to my distress. The square continued its normal activity, shopkeepers chatting with customers, a street musician playing guitar in a corner, children chasing pigeons across the cobblestones. The ordinariness of the scene contrasted sharply with the crisis engulfing me. What do I do now? The question looped in my mind, unanswerable and overwhelming. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, I could connect to some public Wi-Fi. The screen showed no service, no data, no connection to the outside world. I could call Nathan, but my phone couldn't make international calls without a data connection. A text message appeared on my screen sent just before they'd driven out of range. When you're done being difficult, let us know and we'll tell you how to get to Lisbon. The casual cruelty of it brought tears to my eyes. I was not being difficult. I was a 67-year-old woman who had simply wanted to visit a museum instead of rushing to another Instagram-worthy location. And for that, I'd been abandoned in a strange town where I couldn't even ask for help. I looked around the square, truly seeing it for the first time through my fear. It was mid-afternoon, the sun still high and warm. The town was small. I could probably walk its entirety in less than an hour. Surely there would be a hotel, a police station, someone who spoke English. With effort, I forced myself to stand to take a deep breath to think logically through my panic. The first step was finding someone who could help me, someone who spoke English, a hotel concierge perhaps, or a tour guide. As I gathered my courage to approach one of the shopkeepers, my eye caught a small sign in a cafe window. Free Wi-Fi, a lifeline. If I could get online, I could find accommodations, look up transportation options, maybe even book a taxi to take me to Lisbon. I walked to the cafe on unsteady legs, pushing open the door with more force than necessary. Inside, the space was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, the air fragrant with coffee and pastries. A few tables were occupied by tourists and locals, most staring at their phones or engaged in quiet conversation. Passo a ajudar. The young man behind the counter greeted me with a smile. "I'm sorry I don't speak Portuguese," I said, my voice thin with stress. "Do you speak English?" His smile faltered slightly. "Little English." "Yes." "Wi-Fi." I pointed to the sign in the window. "Password. SIM." He brightened. "Understanding." He pointed to a chalkboard behind the counter where the Wi-Fi name and password were written. "Thank you," I said, relief washing through me at this small victory. "And, coffee, please?" "Cafe," he confirmed. "Espresso," I nodded, not caring what kind of coffee he brought as long as I could sit and use the Wi-Fi. I found a small table in the corner and fumbled with my phone, hands still shaking as I entered the password. "Please work. Please work," I silently begged. The Wi-Fi connected, another small victory. I could feel tears threatening again this time from relief rather than fear. The barista brought my espresso, tiny and dark, in a white porcelain cup. I thanked him with what I hoped was a normal smile, not wanting to alarm him with my obvious distress. Now I had connection to the outside world, but what was my plan? Call Nathan and beg him to come back for me. Try to find my own way to Lisbon. Look for a hotel here in Abados for the night. Each option seemed impossible in its own way. The humiliation of calling Nathan after he'd so deliberately abandoned me was almost unbearable to contemplate. Finding my way to Lisbon, a city I'd never visited over 80 kilometers away, seemed overwhelming in my current state. And staying here meant admitting that I was truly on my own, that my son had actually left me behind with no intention of returning promptly. I sipped the espresso, its bitterness matching my thoughts. 3 years of widowhood had taught me self-reliance in many ways, but nothing had prepared me for this kind of abandonment. David would never have allowed such a thing. David would have been outraged at Nathan's behavior. But David wasn't here. No one was here. Just me, a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of others, now forced to take care of herself in the most extreme circumstances. The espresso steadied me somewhat, its caffeine cutting through the fog of panic. I opened my Maps app and downloaded the offline map of Portugal, something I should have done at the beginning of the trip. I opened my browser and searched for hotels in Obados. There were several, ranging from luxury pussas to modest guest houses. As I scrolled through the options, a notification appeared on my screen. A text from Nathan: "Mom, don't be ridiculous. Just take a taxi to Lisbon. We'll pay for it when you get here." The dismissive tone ignited something new inside me. Not fear, not panic, but anger. Pure, clarifying anger. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered my response. After a moment, I typed, "I'm safe. Don't worry about me. Enjoy your Instagram dinner." Then I turned off notifications from both Nathan and Elise, set my phone down, and took another sip of espresso. The bitter liquid tasted different now, like resolve, like the first decision I'd made for myself in a very long time. I would not be rushing to Lisbon today. I would not be begging my son to rescue me from a situation he had deliberately created. I would figure this out on my own. First hotel, I murmured to myself, scrolling through options again. Then food, then we'll see. The simple act of making a plan, of taking control of my situation instead of surrendering to panic, steadied me further. I was still afraid, still hurt, still alone in a foreign country. But I was no longer paralyzed by these facts. I was Judith Palmer, 67 years old, widowed, abandoned, but not broken. Not yet. The cafe owner watched me with increasing concern as I hunched over my phone researching accommodation options with grim determination. After my third espresso, ordered through a combination of pointing and smiling, he approached my table. "Problem?" he asked in halting English, gesturing to my phone in my clearly distressed state. I hesitated, embarrassment washing over me. How could I explain that my own son had abandoned me in a foreign town as some sort of punishment for wanting to see a museum? The humiliation was almost as overwhelming as the fear, but I needed help, and pride had no place in survival. My family. I began searching for simple words. They left in car. I mimicked driving away. "I need hotel for tonight." His eyes widened in disbelief. "Familia desa." He switched back to Portuguese in his shock, then caught himself. "Family left you alone." I nodded, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that sitting alone with my panic hadn't. The young man's expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "Not good," he said firmly. "Not good family." He pointed to himself. "Miguel, I help." Relief flooded through me at this small kindness. "Judith," I responded, touching my chest. "Thank you." Miguel pulled out his phone and made a quick call speaking rapid Portuguese that I couldn't begin to follow. After a brief conversation, he turned back to me with a smile. "My tia aunt. She has guest house, small room available, clean, safe, good price." He showed me a photo on his phone of a narrow building with blue shutters and flower boxes. "Not expensive hotel, but good. That looks perfect," I said sincerely. "How far?" Miguel pointed across the square. "There, 3 minutes." The proximity was another relief. In my current state, I wasn't sure I could manage navigating to a distant location. "I take you," Miguel offered, glancing at the nearly empty cafe. "Can watch cafe. 5 minutes only." Before I could protest, he called to an older man sitting at the counter, presumably, who nodded and moved behind the counter. Miguel gestured for me to follow him. Outside, the afternoon sun was starting its descent, casting longer shadows across the cobblestones. The air was warm and scented with flowers from the planters that adorned many of the whitewashed buildings. Under different circumstances, I would have found it charming. We crossed the square, Miguel shortening his stride to match my slower pace. My legs still felt unsteady adrenaline and caffeine, creating a jittery sensation that made walking a conscious effort. "American?" Miguel asked as we walked. "Yes," I confirmed. "From Boston." "Ah, Boston," he grinned. "Celtics Red Sox." Despite everything, I found myself smiling at his enthusiasm. "Yes, exactly. Why family leave you?" he asked, his direct question catching me off guard. I sighed, how to explain the complex dynamics that had led to this moment. "Disagreement," I said simply. "They were angry. They left." Miguel shook his head disapprovingly. "Not good. Family not leave old mother." He immediately looked horrified at his own words. "Sorry, not old. Not old." Under different circumstances, his mortification might have been comical. "It's okay," I assured him. "I am old, and you're right. Family shouldn't leave anyone. We arrived at a narrow building that matched the photo he'd shown me. A hand-painted sign reading Casa de Maria hung beside the door. Miguel knocked, and moments later the door was opened by a woman in her early 60s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple blue dress with a white apron and had the same warm eyes as Miguel. Tia Maria Miguel said, "This is Judith from Boston." He added something in Portuguese, presumably explaining my situation. Maria's expression transformed from polite inquiry to outrage as Miguel spoke. She responded rapidly in Portuguese, her hands gesturing emphatically. I caught the word familia several times, always accompanied by a disapproving shake of her head. "My aunt says, welcome," Miguel translated considerably, editing what had clearly been a much longer tirade. "She has room 60 with breakfast." It was more than I'd planned to spend on a night's accommodation when I'd budgeted for this trip, but given my circumstances, it seemed miraculous to have found anything at all. "That's perfect," I said gratefully, reaching for my wallet. "Thank you both so much." Miguel waved away my thanks. "I go back to cafe now. Tia will help you." He pointed to Maria with a smile. She spoke better English than me. After he left, Maria showed me to a small room on the second floor. It was simple but immaculate, with a wrought iron bed, crisp white linens, and a window overlooking a tiny courtyard filled with potted lemon trees. The bathroom was compact but spotlessly clean, with a shower toilet and pedestal sink. "Is good?" Maria asked, watching my face anxiously. "It's lovely," I assured her. "Perfect." She nodded, satisfied. "You hungry, thirsty?" The question made me realize I hadn't eaten since breakfast. With all the panic and confusion, hunger had been the least of my concerns. But now that she mentioned it, my stomach felt hollow. "Yes, actually. Is there somewhere nearby I could get dinner?" Maria made a dismissive gesture. "I make dinner. Simple but good. You rest now. Dinner at 7 Huzram." She pointed to a small desk in the corner where an electric kettle sat with some tea bags and instant coffee packets. Tea coffee. "Help yourself." Before I could protest that she didn't need to feed me, she had left, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in the quiet room, I sank onto the bed, the events of the day crashing over me like a wave. My own son had abandoned me in a foreign country. I was in a stranger's home in a town I'd never planned to stay in. I had no luggage, just the clothes I was wearing and whatever was in my purse. The absurdity of the situation struck me suddenly, and to my surprise, a laugh bubbled up. Slightly hysterical, but a laugh nonetheless. If my students could see their proper, organized history teacher now, I'd always been the one with contingency plans, the one who brought extra Band-Aids and rain ponchos on field trips, the one who had backup lessons prepared in case the projector failed. Now here I was, completely adrift, dependent on the kindness of strangers. I kicked off my shoes and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Exhaustion washed over me, the adrenaline that had kept me functioning finally ebbing away. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite the unfamiliar surroundings, despite the trauma of the day, sleep claimed me within minutes. I woke to soft knocking and Maria's voice calling, "Sonora Palmer, dinner ready." Disoriented, I sat up quickly, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar room. Then reality crashed back. Nathan the abandonment. Miguel Maria's guest house. Coming, I called my voice with sleep. I hurried to the small bathroom to splash water on my face and smooth my silver-streaked hair. The face that looked back at me from the mirror was pale and drawn with dark circles under the eyes. I pinched my cheeks to bring some color back and straightened my rumpled clothing as best I could. Downstairs, Maria had set a small table in the courtyard with a checkered cloth, a carafe of red wine, and a dish of olives. The lemon trees were strung with small white lights that cast a gentle glow in the gathering dusk. "Better?" she asked, studying my face. "After sleep, much better," I said, managing a genuine smile. "Thank you for all of this. It's very kind." She waved away my thanks. "Not kind, normal, human." She gestured for me to sit. "Eat now. Tomorrow we make plan." Tomorrow. The word hung in the air between us. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring, what decisions I would make, what path I would choose. But for now, there was this moment. This simple meal in a beautiful courtyard, this unexpected kindness from a stranger, this first small victory of survival on my own. I took a sip of the wine Maria poured its rich flavor, grounding me in the present moment. Whatever came next, I had survived the first day on my own. It was a small accomplishment, perhaps, but in that moment it felt monumental. The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through the blue shutters and the distant sound of church bells. For a blissful moment, I existed in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, free from memory or worry. Then reality rushed back. Nathan's betrayal, my abandonment, the uncertain path ahead. My phone showed 7 missed calls and a dozen text messages, all from Nathan. I scrolled through them without opening any, noting the progression from annoyed. "Mom, this is ridiculous." "Call me," to concerned. "Are you okay? Where are you staying?" To what appeared to be genuine worry. "Mom, please respond. We're getting really concerned." His concern came too late. The image of him laughing with Elise as they drove away was seared into my memory. Not a momentary lapse of judgment, but a deliberate act of cruelty. I set the phone aside without responding and made my way to the small bathroom. My reflection looked marginally better than yesterday. Some color had returned to my cheeks, though the worry lines around my eyes seemed deeper. I washed my face and brushed my teeth with the travel-sized toothpaste from my purse, grimacing at my wrinkled clothes. I would need to find a way to purchase some essentials today. Downstairs, Maria was setting a small table in the courtyard for breakfast. She looked up with a warm smile as I approached. "Bombia, you sleep well." "Very well, thank you," I replied, taking the seat she indicated. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness yesterday." She waved away my gratitude as she poured rich, dark coffee into a small cup. "So, what is your plan today?" The direct question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on surviving yesterday that I hadn't thought beyond finding a safe place to sleep. I'm not sure, I admitted. I need to buy some clothes and toiletries. My suitcase was in my son's car. Maria nodded thoughtfully. Obidos has few shops for tourists, but in Caldas de Rainha, 15 minutes by bus, you find everything. Department stores, pharmacies. She studied my face. "But first you must decide. You go to Lisbon to find your son, or you stay." The question hung in the air between us. The logical choice was clear. Go to Lisbon, reunite with Nathan. Finish the planned vacation despite the tension, return to Boston as scheduled, and resume my quiet life of occasional babysitting and solitary dinners. Yet something in me rebelled against this sensible path. The memory of Nathan's callous laughter as they drove away, of Elise's smug satisfaction at my predicament, made my stomach clench. "I don't know," I said finally. "I need to think." Maria nodded, her expression free of judgment. "Think while you eat. Fresh bread, local cheese eggs from my sister's chickens. The simple breakfast was delicious, the coffee strong and reviving. As I ate, I found my thoughts clearing. The panic of yesterday had receded, replaced by a simmering anger, and more surprisingly, a tentative sense of possibility. What if I didn't go to Lisbon? What if instead of chasing after my ungrateful son, I charted my own course? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had my passport, credit card, and some cash. I was in good health. I spoke no Portuguese but could manage basic English communication. I had no pressing responsibilities back home, no pets to feed, no plants to water, no appointments that couldn't be rescheduled. What I didn't have was courage. Or did I? Hadn't. I already survived being abandoned in a foreign country. Hadn't I found accommodation, food, even a moment of connection in this lovely courtyard? "There is bus to Calais at 10:30, Maria said, interrupting my thoughts. "If you want to buy things, I can show you where to catch it." I checked my watch, 9:15. "That would be very helpful." "Thank you." "And your son?" she asked gently. "You will call him." I sighed, the weight of maternal obligation pressing against my newfound resolve. I should at least let him know I'm safe. Maria nodded approvingly. "Yes, let him worry a little. Not too much. Then decide what you want, what I want." The phrase echoed in my mind. When was the last time I had truly considered what I wanted, independent of others' needs or expectations? After breakfast, I composed a brief text to Nathan. I am safe and have found accommodation in Abodos, taking time to think about next steps. We'll be in touch. His response came immediately. Thank God. We were about to call the embassy. Where are you staying? We'll come get you right away. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, just the assumption that I would fall back into line. Grateful for their rescue, I typed back, "No need, I'm fine where I am." Then after a moment's hesitation, I added, "What you did was cruel and dangerous. I need some time." I turned off the phone before I could see his response, unwilling to let his reaction influence my next decisions. Maria walked me to the bus stop, pointing out landmarks along the way so I could find my way back. "Bus returns every hour until 8 p.m., she explained. "Last stop is in front of the market. You cannot miss it." The bus was nearly empty when it arrived. Just a few elderly locals and a young couple with backpacks who appeared to be Australian or New Zealand tourists. I paid the driver with cash, relieved that this simple transaction required no Portuguese on my part. As the bus wound its way through the Portuguese countryside, I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching olive groves and vineyards pass by. For the first time since Nathan had driven away, I felt something like peace settle over me. Not happiness exactly, but a curious lightness. The absence of obligations, of explanations, of accommodating others' preferences at the expense of my own. Caldas de Rainha turned out to be a charming small city with a bustling central market and shops lining the main streets. I located a department store where I purchased 2 changes of clothes underwear and a small bag to carry them. At a pharmacy, I found travel-sized toiletries and a few basic cosmetics. The transactions were conducted with minimal verbal communication, pointing, smiling, nodding, but I managed. Sitting at a cafe with a sandwich and sparkling water, I turned my phone back on to check the time. Nathan had called 4 more times and sent a barrage of texts ranging from concerned to angry. "Mom, this isn't funny. We've contacted the hotel in Abodos. They haven't seen you. Are you trying to punish us? Because it's working. Elise is upset. She says you're ruining the trip." The last one made me laugh out loud, drawing curious glances from nearby tables. Elise was upset. Elise, who had orchestrated my abandonment in a foreign town, who had laughed as they drove away, was upset that I wasn't falling in line with her perfect Instagram vacation. The absurdity of it all suddenly struck me with full force. I had spent decades accommodating others, raising Nathan alone after his father left, supporting him through college and early career, being the perfect mother-in-law who never criticized Elise's self-absorption, babysitting my grandchildren at a moment's notice, even when it meant canceling my own plans. I had been the reliable one, the supportive one, the one who never made waves. And how had I been repaid with abandonment, with cruelty disguised as a joke, with the expectation that I would meekly return to my assigned role after being taught my lesson? In that moment, sitting in a Portuguese cafe surrounded by strangers, something crystallized within me. A decision I hadn't consciously made, but that had been forming since the moment Nathan drove away. I wasn't going back. Not to Lisbon. Not to the suffocating dynamic with Nathan and Elise, not to the life of careful accommodation I'd been living. I had no clear plan, no particular destination in mind, but for the first time in decades, I had something more precious, the freedom to choose my own path. I paid for my lunch and made my way back to the bus stop, my new purchases swinging in a bag at my side. My step was lighter, my posture straighter. Something had shifted inside me. Some invisible burden had been set down, some tight constraint loosened. I was Judith Palmer, 67 years old, alone in Portugal, with nothing but a handful of possessions and a lifetime of unused courage finally surfacing. And somehow, improbably, I felt more alive than I had in years. I returned to Maria's guest house with my modest purchases, a tentative plan forming in my mind. The courtyard was empty when I arrived, but a note on my door informed me that Maria had gone to visit her sister and would return by 6 hours. "Make yourself at home," she had written in careful English, "tea and biscuits and kitchen." Alone in the quiet house, I laid out my new possessions on the bed. 2 simple cotton dresses, underwear, a light cardigan, toiletries, and a small cross-body bag large enough for essentials but easier to manage than my regular purse. Not much, but enough to give me mobility and options. I showered, washing away the last traces of yesterday's panic along with the dust of travel. The hot water soothed muscles I hadn't realized were tense. And by the time I emerged wrapped in a thin towel provided by Maria, I felt somehow renewed. Not just physically clean, but mentally clearer. Dressed in one of my new purchases, a knee-length blue dress with a subtle pattern. I sat by the window and finally turned my attention to the question I'd been avoiding. What next? I pulled out my phone and opened the browser, searching for information that might help me make a decision. Train schedules in Portugal, average hotel costs in various cities, common phrases in Portuguese basic maps of the region. The more I researched, the more my tentative idea solidified into something like a plan. Not returning to Nathan didn't necessarily mean staying in Abydos. Portugal was a small country with an efficient train system. I could go anywhere. Porto, Coimbra, the Algarve, places I'd read about but never expected to visit independently. Or I could leave Portugal entirely. Spain was just a train ride away. So was France. All of Europe lay before me, accessible in ways I'd never considered. But one destination kept drawing my attention. Italy, specifically Tuscany. I taught about the Renaissance for decades, showing my students slides of Florence, Siena, and the hill towns of the Tuscan countryside. I described the art, architecture, and history of a place I'd never seen with my own eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 30 years, I'd ignited students' passion for European history and culture. Yet my own direct experience was limited to rush tours of London and Paris during 2 previous trips, both carefully planned by others with my preferences considered last, if at all. A notification interrupted my browsing. Another text from Nathan. "Mom, please call us. We're about to contact the police." The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Nathan knew perfectly well I wasn't missing. I'd confirmed I was safe. This was simply another attempt to pressure me into compliance, to make me feel guilty for not immediately acquiescing to his demands. I texted back, "No need for police. I am safe and well, taking some time for myself. We'll contact you in a few days." Then I returned to my research, a new determination fueling my search. Within an hour, I had the beginnings of a real plan. Train from Lisbon to Madrid. I would need to get to Lisbon first. Overnight stay in Madrid. Flight from Madrid to Florence. Accommodations in Florence for how long a week too. The open-endedness of the question was both terrifying and thrilling. Without Nathan and Elisa's rigid itinerary, without responsibilities waiting at home, without anyone's expectations to meet but my own, I could stay as long as I wanted. My teacher's pension was modest but sufficient, especially since I'd paid off my small condo before David's death. The life insurance money he'd left me remained largely untouched in low-risk investments. I had savings that I'd been frugally preserving for what exactly? Some nebulous future emergency, the nursing home I might eventually need. What if instead I used some of those carefully hoarded resources to finally live? The thought sent a shiver of rebellion through me, a delicious forbidden feeling that reminded me of being 16 and cutting school to go to a protest march, my first and only act of teenage defiance. I was so absorbed in my planning that I didn't hear Maria return until she knocked gently at my open door. "You look different," she observed, studying my face with a slight smile. More coitus settled. "I've made a decision," I told her, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I'm not going back to my son." Maria nodded, unsurprised. "Good. He doesn't deserve you back." "Not yet. Not just that," I clarified. "I'm going to Italy, to Florence." Her eyebrows rose. "Fenzi alone?" "Yes," I said, the word both terrifying and liberating. I've taught about Renaissance art and history for 30 years. I've always wanted to see it properly, not rushed through in a guided tour. Brave Maria said, genuine admiration in her voice. Very brave. Was it brave or merely reckless? At 67, with no Italian language skills and no previous solo travel experience, was I setting myself up for disaster? But then, what was the alternative? return to Nathan and Elise tail between my legs, grateful for their magnanimous forgiveness, resume my carefully circumscribed life in Boston, waiting for occasional visits from grandchildren whose parents had shown such casual cruelty. Know whatever risks lay ahead, they palled in comparison to the certainty of regret if I retreated now. "I'll need to get to Lisbon," I said, thinking aloud, "for the train to Madrid." "My brother drives to Lisbon tomorrow," Maria offered. "For business, he can take you." "No problem." The simplicity of this solution nearly brought tears to my eyes. That would be wonderful. I can pay him, of course. Maria waved this away. Family price very cheap. She hesitated, then added, "You will tell your son where you go." I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted to disappear without a trace to let Nathan wonder and worry as punishment for his abandonment. But the more mature part, the part that had raised him, loved him, despite his flaws, taught him about consequences and responsibility, knew better. Yes, I decided not the details, but enough that he knows I'm safe, that this is my choice. Maria nodded approvingly. "Good. Not for him, for you. Clean conscience." After she left to prepare dinner, I composed a final message to Nathan. I've decided to continue traveling on my own for a while. I am safe and have everything I need. This is my choice, not a cry for help or an attempt to punish you. I need time and space to think about what happened and what it means for our relationship. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. Please respect my decision. I hesitated over the send button. A lifetime of maternal accommodation making me doubt my resolve. Then I remembered his laughter as they drove away, leaving me alone and afraid in a foreign country. I pressed send, then turned off notifications from both Nathan and Elise. Whatever guilt-inducing, manipulative responses they might send, I didn't need to see them. Not now when my newfound courage felt so fragile, so tentative. That evening, I joined Maria and her brother Joan for dinner in the courtyard. The simple meal of grilled fish, roasted vegetables, and local wine was more satisfying than any of the expensive restaurants Nathan and Elise had chosen for our authentic Portuguese experience. A barrel-chested man in his early 70s, with a booming laugh and twinkling eyes, agreed readily to drive me to Lisbon the next day. "I leave at 8:30, he said in accented but clear English. "Perfect time to avoid traffic. You will be in Lisbon before lunch." As darkness fell and the small white lights strung among the lemon trees cast a gentle glow over the courtyard, I felt a curious sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow, I would leave this unexpected sanctuary. Tomorrow, I would truly strike out on my own. But tonight, surrounded by the kindness of strangers who had become something like friends, I allowed myself to simply be present, to enjoy the food, the wine, the warm night air, the gentle conversation that flowed around and included me, despite our language differences. For the first time since Nathan had driven away, I felt not just resignation or determination, but actual happiness, a small, fragile flame of joy that I cupped carefully in my hands, protecting it from the winds of doubt and fear that still gusted through my mind. I was leaving tomorrow, not returning, but departing a distinction that felt profoundly meaningful as I sipped my wine and listened to the night sounds of abados filtering through the ancient stone walls. The morning dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring day in Portugal. I'd slept surprisingly well, my decision to forge ahead on my own, apparently agreeing with my subconscious even as occasional doubts still flickered through my waking mind. Maria had prepared a simple breakfast that we shared in the courtyard. Strong coffee, fresh bread, local cheese, and slices of perfectly ripe melon. Jom arrived as we were finishing declining coffee but accepting a glass of fresh orange juice. "Ready for adventure?" he asked me with a wink as he helped carry my modest possessions to his car. A well-maintained older model Peugeot parked on a side street near the guest house. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, surprised to find it was true. The paralyzing fear of 2 days ago had receded, replaced by a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in decades. Saying goodbye to Maria was unexpectedly emotional. This woman who had been a stranger just 48 hours ago had become something like a friend, a lifeline thrown when I was drowning in panic and uncertainty. "Obrigada," I said, using one of the few Portuguese words I'd learned for everything. Dinatata, she replied, embracing me warmly. You will be fine. You are stronger than you know. As Jono navigated the narrow streets of Abydos, I looked back at the medieval walls that had witnessed my abandonment and subsequent rebirth. In just 2 days, this small town had transformed from the site of my humiliation to the launching pad for an adventure I'd never imagined possible. Where in Lisbon you go? Dewey asked as we joined the main highway heading south. The train station Santa Apollonia, I told him. I'd booked a ticket on the overnight train to Madrid, departing at 9:30 that evening. The long gap between our arrival in Lisbon and my train's departure would give me time to explore the city at my own pace. No rushing from one photo opportunity to the next. No checking my watch to ensure I wasn't holding everyone up. Ah, you take train. Joe nodded approvingly. Good way to see country. Where you go, Madrid first, then Florence, I explained. Fenzi, his face lit up. Beautiful city. Many years ago I visited with my wife before she died. I'm sorry, I said automatically. About your wife, he shrugged, acceptance evident in the gesture. 10 years now. Life continue. He glanced at me. You also lose husband. 3 years ago, I confirmed. Heart attack. Dwayne nodded. A moment of understanding passing between us. That peculiar fellowship of those who have watched loved ones slip away, who have rebuilt lives around absences. And now, new adventure. He said, his tone lightening. Never too late. Yes, I agreed. The simple affirmation feeling like a promise to myself. Never too late. The drive to Lisbon took just under 2 hours, during which Jerome proved to be excellent company, pointing out landmarks, sharing stories about growing up in Portugal during the dictatorship, asking thoughtful questions about my life in Boston. Unlike the stilted, careful conversations I'd grown accustomed to since David's death, where friends and family seemed afraid to say the wrong thing to remind me of my loss, this exchange flowed naturally, touching on grief but not dwelling there. When we reached the train station, Joe insisted on helping me inside and making sure I understood where to store my bag and how to find my platform later. His kindness, like Maria's, was offered without expectation or judgment, a simple human connection that asked nothing beyond itself. Boy, he said, as we parted, his weathered hands clasping mine briefly. Good journey. Thank you, I replied, meaning it in ways that went beyond the ride he'd provided for everything. After he left, I stored my small bag in a locker and set out to explore Lisbon with no particular agenda beyond absorbing the city at my own pace. The freedom was intoxicating. I wandered narrow streets in the Alhama district, pausing whenever something caught my eye, an elaborately tiled facade, a small shop selling handcrafted items, a cafe with a view that demanded lingering. At one such cafe, perched on a hill with the Tagus River glittering below, I ordered espresso and a pastry, then pulled out my phone for the first time that day. I'd turned notifications back on curious, despite myself, about Nathan's response to my declaration of independence. There were several messages, their tone evolving from anger. This is incredibly selfish. Mom, to concern, are you really okay on your own? To something approaching contrition. I know what we did was wrong, but please don't punish us like this. The latest, sent just an hour ago, seemed almost resigned. At least tell us where you're going so we know you're safe. I considered my response carefully. Part of me still bristled at his assumption that I couldn't manage on my own, that my decision to travel independently was about punishing him rather than reclaiming my autonomy. But the maternal instinct to reassure, to protect from worry, remained strong despite everything. Finally, I typed, I'm in Lisbon today. Then traveling to other European destinations I've always wanted to see properly, I am fine. Making friends, figuring things out, enjoying the freedom to explore at my own pace. This isn't about punishment. It's about finally doing something for myself after decades of putting everyone else first. I'll check in periodically so you know I'm safe. I hesitated, then added, I love you, but I don't like how you treated me. We'll need to address that when I'm ready. For now, please respect my journey. After sending the message, I turned my phone off completely and returned it to my bag. Whatever Nathan's response I didn't need, it intruding on this day that belonged entirely to me. The hours passed in a pleasant haze of exploration. I visited the cathedral, wandered through the Prasadozio, and found a small restaurant for a leisurely lunch of grilled sardines and Vigno Verde. No one rushed me. No one complained that I was spending too long admiring a particular view or architectural detail. No one checked the time with pointed size or scrolled impatiently through their phone while waiting for me to finish my meal. By late afternoon, I'd made my way back toward the train station, stopping at a small market to purchase bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of water for my overnight journey. As I selected a particularly appealing pear, examining it with probably unnecessary care, I realized I was smiling. A small private smile of contentment that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval or satisfaction. This, I thought, is what freedom feels like. At the station, I retrieved my bag and found my platform without difficulty. The train to Madrid was modern and clean, my reserved seat in a second-class compartment, comfortable enough for the overnight journey. As we pulled away from Lisbon, the city's lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, I felt a curious lightness, as if in leaving behind the sight of Nathan's betrayal, I was also shedding the weight of obligations and expectations I'd carried for so long. An elderly Portuguese woman across from me smiled and offered a package of cookies. "Para aim," she said, miming eating, "for journey. Obrigada," I replied, accepting one with a smile. As the train gathered speed, carrying me toward Madrid and then Florence, and who knew what other destinations might follow, I savored the simple cookie and the even simpler kindness of its offering. My journey had just begun, but already I was discovering a world more generous, more accessible than I had dared to imagine in my careful, circumscribed life. The countryside slipped past in deepening shadows, Portugal receding behind me with each click of the rails. Ahead lay Spain, Italy, and the unwritten story of who Judith Palmer might become when she finally belatedly claimed the right to her own adventure. Madrid arrived in a blur of early morning light and the hustle of commuters at Atocha station. I'd slept surprisingly well on the train, lulled by the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails and the gentle rocking of the carriage. Now disembarking with my small bag and rumpled clothes, I felt a curious blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. I navigated the station with relative ease, following signs to the metro, and purchasing a ticket with my rudimentary Spanish, another language I taught about but never properly learned. The ticket agent's rapid-fire response lost me completely, but his pointing finger provided sufficient direction. My flight to Florence wasn't until late afternoon, giving me several hours to explore Madrid. I found a cafe near the station for breakfast, ordering café con leche tostada with more confidence than I felt. When the waiter responded with a barrage of Spanish, I simply smiled and nodded, ending up with exactly what I'd wanted, plus a small glass of fresh orange juice. Small victories, I thought, sipping the perfectly made coffee. 2 days ago, ordering in a foreign cafe would have seemed an insurmountable challenge. Now it was merely the first of many small hurdles I would clear on this journey. After breakfast, I stored my bag in a station locker and set out to explore. With no agenda beyond absorbing the city, I wandered from the grandeur of Plaza Mayor to the elegant gardens of Riro Park, pausing whenever something caught my interest. I purchased a small sketchbook and pencil from a stationery shop, surprising myself by sitting on a park bench and attempting to capture the scene before me. Children playing near a fountain, elderly men engaged in animated conversation, a young couple lost in each other's eyes. The drawing was amateurish at best, but the act of creating it, of truly seeing my surroundings rather than merely glancing at them, felt profoundly satisfying. When had I last drawn anything? Not since college, certainly, where I'd taken art history courses that required visual analysis through sketching. Somewhere along the way, that small pleasure had been set aside, deemed frivolous or time-consuming in a life increasingly defined by efficiency and obligation. "Muy bonito," commented an elderly man who paused near my bench, nodding toward my sketch. "Gracias," I replied, feeling my cheeks warm at the unexpected attention. "No muy bueno." He shook his head, disagreeing with my self-deprecation. "Es honesto." he said, tapping his heart. "From here, not here." He pointed to his eyes, then made a motion like a camera. I understood his meaning immediately that my simple sketch, however technically imperfect, contained something authentic that a mere photograph might miss. The observation touched me deeply, validating not just my amateur drawing, but in some way this entire improbable journey. By mid-afternoon, I made my way back to the station, retrieved my bag, and took the metro to the airport. The process of checking in, navigating security, and finding my gate proceeded without incident. Further evidence that I was more capable than Nathan or I myself had given me credit for. The flight to Florence was brief, just over 2 hours, but as the plane began its descent, my heart rate accelerated with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This was it, the city I'd taught about for decades, the epicenter of Renaissance art and architecture, the place whose history I knew intimately, but whose reality I had never experienced. And I was arriving alone without reservations beyond the first 2 nights at a small hotel I'd booked from Madrid, without a guided tour or a detailed itinerary, without even a command of the language beyond a handful of phrases gleaned from an app I'd downloaded in the airport. What was I thinking? The question reverberated as I collected my bag and followed signs toward ground transportation. The exhaustion of travel was catching up with me, along with a rising tide of self-doubt. I was 67 years old, alone in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language, with no concrete plans beyond a couple of nights' accommodation. Was this adventure or merely foolishness? "Senora, you need taxi?" The question came from a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed uniform standing near the exit with a clipboard. "Yes, please," I replied, relief washing over me at this small assistance. "Hot Alessandre on Borgo Santi Apostoli." He nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "Very good hotel in historic center. Follow me, please." I trailed him to a line of waiting taxis where he spoke rapidly to a driver before opening the rear door for me with a small flourish. "Enjoy Fen Signora, most beautiful city in world." The drive from Florence's small airport to the historic center took about 25 minutes, during which I pressed my face to the window, like an eager child drinking in my first glimpses of the city I described to countless students over the years. The late afternoon light bathed ancient buildings in a golden glow that softened their edges and heightened their majesty. When we crossed the Arno River, the iconic Ponte Vecchio, visible just downstream, tears sprang unexpectedly to my eyes. I was here. I was actually here, seeing with my own eyes what I'd only known through photographs and art history texts. The taxi navigated increasingly narrow streets before stopping in front of a modest entrance with a small brass plaque reading, "Hot Alessandra." The driver helped me with my bag and pointed to an intercom beside the door. "Ring for reception," he explained. "They send elevator for you." I thanked him, paid the fare plus a small tip, and watched as he drove away, leaving me standing alone on a Florentine street as the evening shadows lengthened. For a moment, panic threatened the same overwhelming fear I'd felt when Nathan drove away in Portugal. But I breathed deeply and pressed the intercom button. "Buera Hotel Alessandra." A cheerful female voice responded. "Hello," I said. "I have a reservation. Judith Palmer." "Ah, Senora Palmer. Yes, we expect you." "Come up, please." A buzzer sounded, and I pushed open the heavy door to find a tiny elevator, really just a converted dumb waiter waiting to carry me to the hotel lobby on the 3rd floor. The ancient contraption creaked alarmingly as it ascended, but delivered me safely to a reception area that was as warm and welcoming as it was modest. Benvenuta Arens greeted a smiling young woman behind the desk. "Welcome to Florence, Senora Palmer. We are very happy to have you with us." The genuine warmth in her welcome brought another unexpected wave of emotion. I was tired, disoriented, still questioning my own judgment in embarking on this journey. But I was here in Florence being welcomed as if my arrival was not merely expected, but celebrated. "Thank you," I managed, blinking back tears. "I'm very happy to be here." After checking in, I was shown to a small but charming room with a window overlooking a narrow street. The furnishings were simple. A double bed with a row iron frame, a small desk, a wardrobe, an ensuite bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, but everything was immaculately clean and thoughtfully arranged. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10, the receptionist explained. And please, if you need any assistance with tours, reservations, anything at all, just ask at the desk. We are here to help. When she left, I sank onto the bed, the enormity of what I had done finally catching up with me. I had traveled from Portugal to Spain to Italy, navigating trains, planes, and taxis with nothing but my wits and determination. I was in Florence, a city I had longed to see for as long as I could remember, answerable to no one but myself. The realization was overwhelming. I lay back on the bed, not even bothering to remove my shoes, and let the tears come. Not tears of fear or regret, but of something more complex and ultimately liberating. Relief, perhaps, or validation, or simply the release of tension after days of running on adrenaline and newfound courage. As twilight deepened into night outside my window, I drifted into sleep, still fully clothed, the sounds of a Florentine evening, distant conversations, the occasional scooter, church bells marking the hour, forming a gentle lullaby from my first night in the city of my dreams. I woke to sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains and the distant sound of church bells. For a moment, I lay disoriented, unsure of where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then memory flooded back. The abandonment in Portugal, the decision to travel independently, the journey to Florence. Florence. I was in Florence. I sat up quickly, suddenly wide awake, despite having slept in my clothes. A glance at my watch showed it was just past 7, early enough that I had the entire day ahead of me to begin exploring the city I'd taught about for decades but never seen. After a quick shower and change into one of my 2 dresses, I made my way down to the hotel's small breakfast room. A modest buffet offered fresh pastries, fruit yogurt, and coffee. I filled a plate and took a seat by the window, watching the street below come to life as shopkeepers raised awnings and cafes set out tables. First time in Florence, the question came from an American woman about my age who was seated at a nearby table. Yes, I admitted, though, I've taught Renaissance art and history for 40 years. It feels surreal to finally be here. A teacher. How wonderful. She introduced herself as Margaret, a retired librarian from Chicago traveling with her sister who was still sleeping. You must have quite a list of things you want to see. Too many for the short time I have, I replied. Though in truth I hadn't set any fixed departure date, the open-endedness of my journey still felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Well, if you'd like some company today, Susan and I are visiting the Uffizi this morning. You're welcome to join us. The invitation was tempting. The prospect of friendly English-speaking companions as I navigated my first day in Florence. But something held me back. I had just escaped one travel situation where others determined the pace and priorities. Did I want to immediately align myself with new companions, however pleasant? That's very kind, I said carefully, but I think I need to experience this first day on my own. Maybe another time. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, sometimes solitude is the best way to really see a place. She scribbled on a napkin and handed it to me. Here's my email if you change your mind or want to meet up later in your stay. I tucked the napkin into my purse, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you. After breakfast, I consulted with the helpful receptionist who marked a simple walking route on a map that would take me to the Duomo, then the Piazza della Signora, and finally the Ponte Vecchio. For first day, these 3. Very good introduction to Firenze, she assured me. Tomorrow, perhaps museums I can help with reservations. Armed with my map, a bottle of water, and a sense of wonder, I set out into the Florentine morning. The narrow streets opened occasionally into small piazzas, each with its own character, a neighborhood church, a tiny market, a cluster of cafes. I walked slowly, absorbing details I would have missed if rushed. The intricate ironwork on balconies, shrines to the Madonna, tucked into corners of buildings, the play of light and shadow across centuries-old facades. When I turned a corner and suddenly saw the Duomo rising before me, I gasped audibly. No photograph had prepared me for the sheer scale and intricacy of Brunelleschi's dome and the multicolored marble facade. I stood transfixed, oblivious to the tourist crowd swirling around me, seeing with my own eyes what I had described to students for decades, using only slides and passionate words. Finding a spot against a wall where I wouldn't block pedestrian traffic, I pulled out my sketchbook and attempted to capture not the entire cathedral, an impossible task, but one small detail, a section of the campanile where Guto's design incorporated different colored marbles in geometric patterns. As I sketched, time seemed to slow the hustle of the square receding as I focused entirely on the play of light across stone, the precise relationships of shapes, the essence of what made this structure not just impressive, but transcendent. Molto bene, commented a voice beside me. I looked up to find an elderly Italian man peering at my drawing. "You are artist." "No," I replied, feeling my cheeks warm at the attention. "Just a tourist, but I taught art history for many years." Ah, his face lit with understanding. You see, with educated eye. Not just taking photo like he mimicked the rapid fire clicking of a camera and hurried movement making me laugh. "Exactly," I agreed. "I want to really see, not just look." He nodded approvingly. "This is right way to know for slow attento with heart, not just eyes." He tapped his chest, then his forehead. "Enjoy my city, Senora. She has much to tell you." As he walked away, I realized I was smiling, a deep, genuine smile that felt unfamiliar on my face. When had I last felt this kind of pure, uncomplicated joy, this sense of being exactly where I should be? Doing exactly what I wanted to do, I continued my exploration, moving from the Duomo to the Piazza della Signoria, where copies of famous sculptures, including Michelangelo's David, stood in the open air, much as they had during the Renaissance. I sat at a cafe on the edge of the square, ordering an espresso and a small pastry, content to simply observe the flow of life in this historic space. My phone buzzed in my purse, the first time I'd thought to check it since arriving in Florence. Several messages from Nathan showed on the screen, their tone evolving from anger to concern to something approaching contrition. "Mom, this has gone far enough. Tell us where you are. We're worried about you. This isn't like you. Please just let us know you're safe. I'm sorry for what happened in Portugal. We were wrong. Please come back." The final message sent just an hour ago caught me by surprise. "If you really want to do this, at least tell us where you are so we can stop worrying." Progress. I thought wryly, not acknowledgement that I had every right to travel independently, but at least recognition that I might actually want to do so. I considered my response carefully, then typed, "I'm in Florence, Hotel Alessandre. I am safe and happy. Will check in every few days, but need this time for myself." After sending the message, I turned my phone off and returned it to my purse. Whatever Nathan's response, it could wait. This day, this perfect sun-drenched Florentine day, belonged to me alone. I continued to the Ponte Vecchio, the ancient bridge lined with jewelry shops that spanned the Arno River. Leaning against the stone railing at the center of the bridge, I gazed at the water flowing beneath, at the buildings lining the riverbanks, at the distant hills beyond the city. A sense of profound contentment washed over me. Not happiness exactly, which seemed too active in emotion, but a deep, quiet joy that felt like coming home to myself after a long absence. In that moment, standing on a bridge that had witnessed centuries of human drama, I understood with sudden clarity why I had needed this journey. It wasn't just about seeing Florence or asserting my independence. It was about reclaiming the woman I had been before. Life's obligations and accommodations had slowly erased her. The passionate teacher, the curious mind, the soul capable of being moved to tears by beauty. That woman hadn't disappeared when Nathan drove away in Portugal. She had been there all along, waiting patiently to emerge when I finally found the courage to set her free. Days melted into a week, then two, as Florence wrapped me in its Renaissance embrace. I fell into a rhythm that felt both novel and natural. Early mornings spent at quiet cafes with my sketchbook. Days exploring museums and churches at my own deliberate pace. Evenings watching the sunset from different vantage points around the city. I'd moved from the Hotel Alessandra to a small apartment I'd found through the receptionist's cousin, a tiny but charming space in a 16th century building near Stone Spirito, across the Arno, in the less touristy Oltrarno district. The rental was month to month, a flexibility that suited my still undefined plans. My apartment had a minuscule kitchen where I learned to prepare simple Italian meals from ingredients purchased at the neighborhood mercato. The daily ritual of selecting fresh produce, practicing my growing Italian vocabulary with patient vendors, and carrying my treasures home in a woven market bag became one of my unexpected pleasures. I'd settled into a pattern of checking my phone every few days, sending brief updates to Nathan still in Florence visited the Utidi today. All is well, and occasionally responding to Susan's increasingly infrequent inquiries about when I might return to Boston. The urgency of these communications had diminished as weeks passed, and it became clear that I was neither in danger nor having a nervous breakdown just choosing a different path than expected. On this particular morning, a Tuesday in late June, warm but not yet oppressively hot, I had settled at my favorite cafe in the small piazza near my apartment. The owner, Giorgio, greeted me by name and brought my usual order without being asked. Cafe macchiato and a small cornetto. Buongiorno, Signora Judith, he said, setting down my breakfast with a flourish. Beautiful day. Yes, bellissimo. I agreed, my accent still terrible, but my vocabulary expanding daily. I opened my sketchbook to a fresh page intending to capture the ancient wellhead in the center of the piazza when a voice spoke from nearby. You have improved since the Duomo. I looked up to find the elderly Italian man who had commented on my drawing that first day in Florence. He stood beside my table, leaning slightly on a walking stick, his eyes twinkling with recognition. You remember, I said, surprised and touched that he would recall our brief encounter from weeks ago. Of course, the American teacher with the artist's eye. He gestured to the empty chair across from me. May I join you? My old legs need rest, please, I said, closing my sketchbook. I'm Judith Antonio, he replied, lowering himself carefully into the chair. Antonio Ricci. Giorgio appeared immediately, greeting Antonio with the warm familiarity of long acquaintance. They exchanged rapid Italian that I couldn't follow, resulting in an espresso being placed before Antonio moments later. You are still in Firenze, Antonio observed after taking a sip of his coffee. No quick tourist visit for you. No, I agreed. I've extended my stay. He nodded as if this explained everything. Firenze has captured you. This happens especially to those who truly see. There was something about Antonio's directness, his lack of superficial pleasantries that invited honesty. I was supposed to be on a family vacation, I found myself explaining. My son and his wife, we had a disagreement. They left me behind in a small town in Portugal. Antonio's bushy white eyebrows rose in surprise, then drew together in disapproval. Left you alone? Yes. The admission still stung, though less sharply than before. They thought I would immediately call and beg them to come back for me. Instead, I decided to travel on my own. Brava, he said, simply his approval warming me more than I'd expected. Very brave. Or very foolish, I said with a self-deprecating smile. I'm 67 with no travel experience and limited language skills. Antonio waved this away as irrelevant. Courage is not absence of fear. Courage is fear, but doing anyway. He studied me with keen eyes that missed nothing. You were teacher of what subject history, I replied. Specifically, Renaissance art and history. His face lit with genuine delight. Perfecto. And now you see with your own eyes what you taught for many years. Exactly. It's overwhelming sometimes in the best possible way. We fell into easy conversation about art history travel life. Antonio, I learned, was 72, a retired professor of literature who had taught at the University of Florence for 4 decades. A widower for 15 years, he divided his time between his apartment in the city and a small country property in the hills outside Montepulciano, where his family had produced wine for generations. Nothing grand, he assured me. Small production, traditional methods. My nephew manages now, but I helped during harvest. As we talked, I found myself more engaged and animated than I had been in conversations for years. Antonio listened attentively, asked insightful questions, and offered observations that revealed both intelligence and wisdom. There was no checking of watches, no glancing at phones, no subtle signals of impatience or boredom that I'd grown accustomed to in interactions with Nathan and Elise. When Giorgio brought our second round of coffee, Antonio asked if I'd visited the Bronacci Chapel yet. When I admitted I hadn't, he shook his head in mock dismay. Masaccio's frescoes, essential revolutionary use of perspective and light. You cannot truly understand Florentine Renaissance without seeing. He glanced at his watch. It is open now, not far from here. Perhaps the invitation hung in the air between us, not presumptuous, simply offered. I found myself nodding before I'd consciously decided. I'd like that, I said, if you're sure it's not an imposition. Imposition, he looked genuinely puzzled. To share great art with someone who will appreciate this is pleasure, not burden. We finished our coffee and set off at a leisurely pace that accommodated both his walking stick and my inclination to absorb details, rather than rush from one site to the next. As we walked, Antonio pointed out architectural features and historical details I might have missed: the stone tabernacles at street corners, the family crests embedded in building facades, the subtle differences in construction techniques across centuries. The Bronacci Chapel, housed within the larger church of Santa Maria del Carmine, was quiet when we arrived, with only a handful of visitors. Antonio led me to a specific spot where the light illuminated Maceo's expulsion from Eden to best advantage. "Look," he said softly, "the first truly human figures in Renaissance art, not idealized, not symbolic, real people with real grief." I gazed at the fresco, seeing with fresh eyes what I'd only known through photographs. The raw emotion on Eve's face, the despair in Adam's posture, the revolutionary naturalism that had helped launch the Renaissance. Tears pricked unexpectedly behind my eyelids. "It's extraordinary," I whispered. "Yes," Antonio agreed, his voice equally hushed. After 1,000 years of stylized Byzantine tradition, suddenly humanity, real bodies, real emotions. He glanced at me, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Revolution in paint. We spent over an hour in the chapel, Antonio pointing out details and explaining contexts I'd taught but never fully appreciated without seeing the work in person. His knowledge was profound, but worn lightly offered as shared enthusiasm rather than academic showing off. Afterward, he suggested lunch at a small trattoria nearby. Not for tourists, real Florentine food, and I found myself accepting without hesitation, over plates of pappardelle with wild boar ragu and glasses of Chianti. Our conversation ranged widely from art to literature to our respective experiences teaching. "And your family?" he asked eventually. "The son who abandoned you in Portugal. You have reconciled?" I sighed, setting down my fork. "Not exactly. We've been in limited contact. He knows where I am, that I'm safe, but we haven't addressed what happened." Antonio nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes distance is necessary before true understanding is possible. That's what I'm hoping." I admitted I needed to find myself again before I could face him without simply falling back into old patterns. "And have you found yourself?" the question asked without judgment or expectation gave me pause. Had I? These weeks in Florence had certainly awakened parts of me long dormant. My passion for art and history, my capacity for solitude, my ability to navigate unfamiliar circumstances. But was that the same as truly finding myself? I'm not sure, I said honestly. "I think I'm still in the process." Antonio smiled, a warm expression that transformed his weathered face. "Good answer. Finding oneself is not destination, but journey. Yes, always becoming." As we finished our meal with tiny cups of espresso, Antonio mentioned that he would be returning to his country property the following week. Summer heat begins soon in city, better in hills, cooler, quieter. "It sounds lovely," I said sincerely. He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps if you wish to see different part of Tuscany, you might visit as my guest." The guest house is small but comfortable, good base for exploring hill towns. The invitation surprised me. We had spent only a few hours together, yet there was an ease between us that belied our brief acquaintance. Still, prudence raised caution flags. I was a woman alone in a foreign country, considering an invitation to an isolated property from a man I barely knew. Antonio seemed to read my thoughts. No pressure, of course. My housekeeper Sophia is always there. She would prepare your room, cook meals. Very proper. His eyes twinkled. I am old professor, not dangerous man. I found myself smiling at his directness. Let me think about it, of course. He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. My telephone-email decision is yours. As we parted outside the trattoria, Antonio took my hand briefly. Thank you for sharing Maciaseo with me today. Seeing great art through fresh eyes is gift. Thank you for showing me, I replied. Your insights made it so much more meaningful. Walking back to my apartment in the golden afternoon light, I turned the unexpected invitation over in my mind. The countryside around Montepulciano was indeed supposed to be spectacular, and I had considered exploring beyond Florence eventually. But was I ready to accept such an invitation, to trust not only Antonio, whose integrity I sensed but couldn't prove, but also my own judgment so recently shaken by Nathan's betrayal? I slipped Antonio's card into my purse, neither accepting nor rejecting the possibility it represented. Like so much on this journey, the decision didn't need to be made immediately. I could sit with it, consider it from all angles, and choose based on what I truly wanted, a luxury I was still growing accustomed to after decades of accommodating others' preferences and needs before my own. For now, I had Maceo's revolutionary fresco filling my mind, a delicious meal, satisfying my body, and the warm memory of conversation with a kindred spirit lightening my heart. It was more than enough for one remarkable day in my still unfolding renaissance. The next week passed in a pleasant blur of museum visits, leisurely walks, and increasingly confident interactions in my limited but growing Italian. Each morning I woke to sunlight filtering through my apartment's shutters and the distant sounds of Florence coming to life. Church bells, delivery trucks, conversations drifting up from the street below. Antonio's invitation lingered in my thoughts, neither dismissed nor accepted. I found myself weighing the possibilities from all angles. The countryside would be a welcome respite from the growing summer heat and increasing tourist crowds in Florence. Montepulciano and the surrounding hill towns were on my list of places to visit. The presence of a housekeeper alleviated safety concerns, but beneath these practical considerations lay deeper questions. Was I ready to accept hospitality from someone who was still essentially a stranger? Did I trust my own judgment after the shock of Nathan's betrayal had so recently undermined my confidence? And was there something more to this invitation? Not romance exactly, but the potential for a connection I wasn't sure I was prepared to navigate. On a particularly warm morning, I took my coffee to the tiny balcony overlooking the street, Antonio's business card in hand. The elegant simplicity of the cream-colored card with its embossed lettering seemed to reflect the man himself, refined, without pretension, traditional, yet unpretentious. My phone buzzed inside the apartment. The distinctive pattern I'd assigned to Nathan's calls, I sighed, setting down my coffee to retrieve it. Our communications had settled into a pattern, brief text updates from me every few days. Occasional calls from him that I sometimes answered, sometimes didn't, depending on my emotional reserves. Today, I decided to answer. Hello, Nathan. Mom. His voice held equal parts relief and weariness. I was beginning to think you were avoiding my calls. Sometimes I am. I admitted a frankness that would have been impossible before Portugal. Sometimes I need space. He was silent a moment, absorbing this uncharacteristic directness. How are you? He finally asked, his tone softer. I'm well. Very well, actually. I returned to the balcony, phone in hand. Florence agrees with me. You've been there almost a month now. An edge of judgment crept into his voice. Don't you think it's time to what I interrupted, surprising us both? Time to come home. Time to return to my proper place. Time to pretend nothing happened. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its certainty. I was going to say, time to let us know your plans, but I hear how that sounds now. Progress, I thought. Small but real. I don't have specific plans, Nathan. I watched an elderly Italian woman carefully selecting tomatoes at the small grocery across the street, the mundane scene suddenly precious in its ordinariness. That's part of what I'm enjoying, the freedom to decide day by day what I want to do. That doesn't sound like you, he said, a hint of accusation in his tone. Maybe it doesn't sound like the mother you knew, I acknowledged, but perhaps it sounds exactly like the woman I really am or am becoming. Mom, he hesitated, clearly struggling. What happened in Portugal, Elise and I, we were wrong. We've talked about it a lot since then. It was cruel and dangerous, and I'm deeply ashamed. The apology, however belated, washed over me like cool water. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed to hear these words until they were finally spoken. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. It means a great deal to me. I want to make it right, he continued. Tell me how to make it right. The simplicity of his request touched me, but I recognized the pattern. Nathan wanting a clear path to absolution, a defined task that would restore the status quo and relieve his guilt. It's not that simple, I told him gently. What happened in Portugal revealed something fundamental about our relationship, about how you see me, and how I've allowed myself to be seen that can't be fixed with a single gesture or apology. Then what do you want from me? A flash of the old impatience colored his question. Time, I said simply. Space to figure out who I am apart from being your mother. And eventually, when I'm ready, a conversation about building a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and accommodation. And when will that be, he pressed. When will you be ready? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I will come home, Nathan. Just not yet. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony for a long time, turning our conversation over in my mind. Nathan's apology had been genuine, I believed, but his expectation that we could quickly resolve 3 decades of unhealthy dynamics revealed how much work still lay ahead. My gaze fell on Antonio's card still in my hand. Perhaps what I needed now was not a return to the familiar, but a further step into the unknown, not running away from the past, but moving deliberately toward a future of my own choosing. Decision made. I picked up my phone again and dialed the number on the card. Antonio answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm with pleased surprise when I identified myself. Judith, I hoped you might call. I've been considering your invitation, I said, suddenly nervous, despite my resolution to visit Montepulciano. Yes, the single word carried a wealth of patient inquiry. I'd like to accept if the offer still stands. Of course it stands. His enthusiasm was palpable even through the phone. When would you like to come? I leave Florence tomorrow, but any time after is good. We settled on the following weekend, giving me time to wrap up my affairs in Florence, informing my landlord, deciding which few possessions to bring and which to leave behind, making a final visit to my favorite museums and cafes. Antonio would send a car to bring me to the property, he insisted. Driving in countryside can be confusing for visitors. My nephew Luca will come for you. Very reliable. Excellent English. After arranging the details, we chatted briefly about the weather. Growing hotter in Florence, pleasantly warm in the hills. The tourist situation increasingly crowded in the city, more manageable in smaller towns, and my continued exploration of the city, a previously undiscovered bottle in a small church near my apartment. As we prepared to hang up, Antonio said something that caught me by surprise. I'm glad you called Judith. Not everyone recognizes opportunity for new chapter when it appears. The simple observation stayed with me as I began preparations for this next phase of my journey, a new chapter. That's exactly what this was. Not an ending, not an escape, but the deliberate turning of a page to see what might be written next. The next few days passed in a flurry of small tasks and farewell rituals. I had coffee one last time with Giorgio, who insisted on gifting me a small bag of his special roast. For morning coffee in countryside, he explained with a wink, so you don't forget Fenzi. I visited my favorite museums for final lingering looks at works that had become like friends. Botticelli's Birth of Venus, Michelangelo's David Fra Angelico's serene Annunciation frescoes. In each case, I allowed myself to simply absorb their beauty without the pressure to memorize or analyze that had characterized my first visits. On my last evening in Florence, I walked to the Piazzale Michelangelo, climbing the steps to the panoramic terrace that offered sweeping views of the city. The setting sun bathed the Renaissance cityscape in golden light, the Duomo's distinctive dome, and Giotto's Campo rising above the sea of terracotta roofs like beacons from another time. As I gazed at the city that had sheltered and transformed me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. I had arrived in Florence broken and uncertain, still reeling from betrayal and abandonment. I would leave whole and resolute, not because Florence had healed me, but because it had provided the space and beauty in which I could heal myself. I sent a final text to Nathan before going to bed that night, moving on to the Tuscan countryside for a while. We'll have limited cell service, but we'll check messages every few days. All is well. His response came quickly. Countryside sounds nice. Stay safe. We miss you. We gave me pause. Nathan speaking for himself and Elise assuming a unity of feeling that I doubted existed. But I appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. The acknowledgement that my absence left a space in their lives, however inconvenient or uncomfortable. In the morning, I packed my few belongings into the small bag I'd purchased in Madrid, what felt like a lifetime ago. Looking around the tiny apartment that had been my home for nearly a month, I felt a bittersweet pang of departure. But unlike my hurried exit from Portugal, this leaving was deliberate, chosen part of a journey rather than an escape. Luca arrived precisely at the agreed time, a handsome man in his early 30s with Antonio's eyes and an easy smile. He loaded my bag into the trunk of a well-maintained Alfa Romeo and opened the passenger door with a flourish. Welcome, Senora Palmer. My uncle has spoken highly of you. I am to deliver you safely to La Colombia. La Colombia, I repeated, unfamiliar with the term. The dovecote, he translated. It is the name of our family property for the old tower where doves once nested. He grinned. Now it holds wine, not birds. As we drove out of Florence, I watched the city recede in the side mirror, its spires and domes gradually giving way to the gentler landscape of the Tuscan countryside. Ahead lay rolling hills covered with vineyards and olive groves, cypress trees standing like sentinels along winding roads, medieval hill towns crowning distant rises. I had no idea what awaited me at La Colombia, what this next chapter might contain, but as the countryside unfolded before me in all its sun-drenched glory, I felt a sense of anticipation rather than anxiety, of opening rather than closing. Whatever came next, I would meet it as this new version of myself, a woman who had discovered at 67 that it was never too late to begin again. The drive from Florence to Montepulciano took just under 2 hours, winding through the heart of Toscaniani, on roads that alternated between modern highways and narrow country lanes. Luca proved to be an excellent companion, informative without being intrusive, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history while also allowing comfortable silences when the scenery demanded quiet appreciation. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the landscape transformed into the Toscaniani of paintings and postcards, rolling hills in shades of green and gold, punctuated by dark cypress trees, and the silvery gray of olive groves. Vineyards stretched in geometric precision across hillsides, their neat rows creating living patterns that followed the contours of the land. We are entering Vino Noil territory, Luca explained as we passed a particularly expansive vineyard, the wine that made Montepulciano famous. Our family has grown grapes here for over 300 years. That's remarkable, I said, genuinely impressed by the continuity. Has it always passed from father to son? Luca smiled. Not always. My grandmother Sophia ran the vineyard for 20 years after my grandfather died in the war. The locals thought it scandalous at first, a woman making decisions about pruning and harvest. But she produced some of our finest vintages. His pride in this female ancestor was evident, and I found myself warming to him even more. She sounds formidable. Terrifying, he agreed with a laugh, but also wise. She understood that tradition matters, but must sometimes bend to survive. The road began to climb, and suddenly a medieval hill town appeared ahead, its stone buildings clustered atop a ridge like a crown. Monteolciano Luca announced one of the highest towns in Tuscany. We'll pass through on our way to La Colombaia. The town was a marvel of medieval and Renaissance architecture. Narrow, winding streets opening unexpectedly into graceful piazzas, imposing palazzi alongside humble stone houses, all surrounded by ancient walls that had once protected against Florentine and Chianese armies. "We must bring you back for a proper visit," Luca said as we navigated the tight streets, the cathedral, the wine cellars built into the rock beneath the town, the views from the main square, all worth seeing. Beyond Montepulciano, we descended into a valley of breathtaking beauty before turning onto a gravel road that wound upward again through olive groves and vineyards. After about 10 minutes, we crested a hill and La Colombaia came into view. My first impression was one of harmonious integration with the landscape. Unlike the grand villas I'd occasionally glimpsed from the road, this was a working property that had evolved organically over centuries. The main house, a 2-story stone structure with a terracotta roof and green shutters, was adjoined by a square tower that presumably gave the property its name. Several outbuildings surrounded a central courtyard and vineyards stretched away on the southern slope. "It's beautiful," I said, meaning it sincerely, so perfectly Tuscan. Lucas smiled, pleased by my reaction. Not grand, but authentic. My family has always believed in living well, but simply. As we pulled into the courtyard, Antonio emerged from the main house, a broad smile lighting his face. He wore casual clothes, light cotton trousers, and a short-sleeved shirt that somehow looked elegant on his tall, lean frame. "Benve cola," he called, approaching as Luca helped me from the car. "Welcome to our home. Thank you for having me," I replied, suddenly shy. Despite our previous meetings in Florence, this felt different, more personal, more consequential. "The pleasure is ours," he assured me, gesturing toward the house. "Come, Sophia has prepared refreshments. You must be tired from the journey." The interior of the house was as authentic as its exterior. Cool stone floors, whitewashed walls, and furnishings that blended antiques with comfortable, well-used pieces. Nothing felt pretentious or designed to impress, yet everything radiated quality and care. Antonio led me to a loya overlooking the valley where a table had been set with a carfe of water glasses of chilled white wine and a platter of local specialties, thin-sliced prosciutto, several cheeses, olives, and fresh bread. "Please sit," he urged. "Eat something. The air here gives appetite." As if on cue, a short, round woman with silver-streaked black hair bustled onto the loya, her face creased in a welcoming smile. "Ah, Sophia," Antonio said. "This is our guest, Senora Palmer, from America." "Benvenuta," Sophia said warmly, clasping my hand in both of hers. "I have prepared the garden cottage for you. Very private, very comfortable. If you need anything at all, you tell me." "Thank you," I replied, touched by her genuine welcome. "Please call me Judith." Sophia beamed clearly, pleased by this informality. Judith, beautiful name. Now eat. Food gets cold. Opportunity passes. With that philosophical observation, she bustled back inside, leaving me smiling at her retreating form. "Sophia has been with our family since I was a boy," Antonio explained, pouring water for both of us. "She is the true heart of La Colombaia." "She seems wonderful," I said, accepting a glass of the wine Luca offered. "Everyone has been so welcoming. I feel a bit overwhelmed by such kindness." "Not kindness," Antonio corrected gently. "Hospitality there is difference. Kindness is for those who need it. Hospitality is for honored guests." The distinction touched me deeply. How long had it been since I had been treated not as someone to be accommodated or tolerated, but as someone whose presence was genuinely valued? We spent the afternoon in pleasant conversation, Antonio and Luca sharing stories of the property's history, the challenges and joys of winemaking, and the changes they'd seen in the region over decades. I found myself relaxing completely, the last remnants of travel tension melting away in the warmth of their company and the tranquil beauty of the setting. As the late afternoon light began to soften, Sophia reappeared. "Time to show Judith her cottage before dinner. No, she will want to refresh." "Of course," Antonio agreed, rising from his chair. Forgive me for monopolizing your time, Judith. Sophia is right, you should have time to settle in. The garden cottage proved to be a small stone building set slightly apart from the main house, surrounded by lavender bushes and rose trellises. Originally a groundskeeper's dwelling, Antonio explained it had been renovated into guest quarters with its own entrance and small private garden. Inside the space was compact but thoughtfully designed a sitting area with comfortable chairs and a small writing desk, a bedroom with a row-iron bed dressed in crisp white linens, and a modern bathroom that somehow managed to feel both contemporary and in keeping with the cottage's historic character. "It's perfect," I said, genuinely delighted by the charming space, just the right size for one person. "Sophia has put fresh towels in bathroom water by the bed," Antonio pointed out. "Dinner is at 8, but please, no hurry. Rest, explore, do as you wish. This is your home now. Your home." The simple phrase stirred something deep within me, a longing for belonging I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for all of this." Antonio met my gaze with a warmth that asked nothing expected. Nothing, simply acknowledged our shared humanity. "Thank you for coming. New friends in late life are a special gift." After he left, I unpacked my few possessions, placing them carefully in the ancient wooden wardrobe that occupied one wall of the bedroom. My clothes looked pitifully few in the spacious interior, a visual reminder of how lightly I was traveling through this unexpected chapter of my life. I stepped outside into the small private garden, breathing deeply of air scented with lavender and roses. The view from this spot was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretching to distant mountains, vineyards catching the late afternoon light, a medieval church tower visible on a far ridge. Settling onto a weathered stone bench, I pulled out my phone, planning to send a brief update to Nathan. To my surprise, there was no signal, not even a single bar. I recalled Antonio mentioning limited cell service, but I hadn't anticipated complete disconnection. Instead of anxiety, I felt an unexpected lightness, a reprieve from obligation, from the weight of others' expectations and concerns. For the first time since Portugal, I was truly unreachable. Whatever was happening in Boston, in Nathan and Elisa's world, in my former life, would continue without my knowledge or intervention. Just for now, just for this moment, I could simply be here fully present in this beautiful place, this unforeseen juncture in my journey. The dinner bell rang as the sun began its descent behind the distant hills, calling me back to the main house. As I walked the lavender-lined path, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Not that everything was resolved or perfect, but that I was exactly where I needed to be in this moment. Whatever came next with Nathan, with my life in Boston, with this unexpected friendship with Antonio, would unfold in its own time. For now, there was this evening, this meal, this continuing discovery of who Judith Palmer might be when freed from the constraints of others' expectations. The woman who had been abandoned in Portugal was gone, transformed by courage and circumstance into someone new, someone who had learned that endings could become beginnings, that loss could open doors to unexpected gifts, that it was never too late to start again. As I entered the warm light spilling from the house, I stepped not just into dinner, but into the next chapter of a story still being written my own. If you like my story, please like and share.